I said, this is my hair. I bought it. I'm staying.
She made us laugh. She made us cry. And man, she could sing. Nell Carter was that rare kind of performer who could walk into a room and light it up before she even said a word. From the church choirs of Birmingham to the bright lights of Broadway and the laughter of primetime TV, she did it all. But behind the applause and the smile, there was pain deep, private pain that fame could never fix. She broke barriers for black women on television, yet never truly got the credit she deserved. Her story is one of brilliance, struggle, and a legacy that still shines 20 years after her passing. Let's get into the story of the unforgettable Nell Carter right now. Let me know where you're watching this from in the comments. Grab yourself a warm drink, maybe a cup of water or tea, sit back, and let's start this journey together. Nell Ruth Hardy was born on the 13th of September 1948 in Birmingham, Alabama, a city that, at the time, was one of the most racially divided places in America. The 1950 was no easy decade for a young black girl trying to find her voice. Her mother, Edna May, worked long hours as a maid to keep food on the table, while her father, Horace Hardy, passed away when Nell was still a child. That loss hit her hard. The absence of a father figure and the constant struggle of poverty would shape the emotional depth that later came through in her voice. Growing up in the Deep South, faith was everything. The church wasn't just a place to worship, it was the beating heart of the black community. And for little Nell, it was also her first stage. She sang in the choir at the Mt. Zion Baptist Church, and folks around town started whispering that she had something special. That big, soulful voice didn't just fill the room, it lifted spirits. Even at a young age, Nell had that rare ability to make people feel something. But outside those church walls, life was rough. Segregation was real, and so was the danger. Birmingham was the epicenter of racial tension bombings, protests, and fear were part of everyday life. Yet somehow, Nell carried herself with joy. She once said that singing was how she escaped all the noise. "When I sing," she told a friend, "I forget where I am." By the time she reached her teenage years, she was already performing in local events and school productions. Teachers noticed her talent and encouraged her to pursue the arts, but opportunities for young black women in Alabama were nearly non-existent. Still, Nell refused to let her dreams be boxed in by circumstance. She had that inner fire, that determination that made people stop and say, "This girl's going somewhere." Oh, in a world that tried to silence her, she kept singing louder. Every note carried the story of a girl who had already seen too much pain but refused to let it define her. That strength, that grit would soon carry her far beyond Birmingham. As Nell moved through her teenage years, her world began to expand. She attended A.H. Parker High School, one of the most respected black schools in Birmingham, where art and music weren't just extracurricular, they were a form of survival. Her teachers saw something extraordinary in her voice. They'd tell her, "You don't just sing, you testify." And they were right. Nell wasn't trying to sound like anyone else. She sang with the power of someone twice her age, with raw emotion born from hardship and faith. But even with talent that big, opportunity was still small. The 1,960 inches Alabama wasn't kind to dreamers, especially not to a young black girl who wanted to make it in show business. Still, Nell wasn't afraid to dream out loud. She started performing in small local shows and church fundraisers, catching the attention of traveling musicians who passed through town. They'd tell her, "You belong in New York, baby, that's where the real stage is." Those words stuck with her. At just 15, tragedy struck again. Her older brother, Bernard, was accidentally killed when a shotgun discharged at a friend's house. That loss shattered her world. It was the kind of pain no teenager should have to carry. But Nell turned that grief into fuel. Singing became her therapy. The more life tried to break her, the louder she sang. By her late teens, she joined a gospel group called the Melodettes, performing around the South. Those gigs didn't pay much, but they gave her something even more valuable: confidence. Standing on those makeshift stages, watching people clap and cry to her songs, Nell knew she was meant for something bigger. Eventually, the call of destiny grew too loud to ignore. With nothing but a small suitcase, a few dollars, and a dream, Nell left Birmingham and headed to New York City in the late 1960s. She didn't know a soul there. No safety net, no promises, just her voice and her faith. It was a leap of faith that would change everything. From the dusty streets of Alabama to the neon lights of Broadway, Nell Carter was about to begin the journey that would turn her from a church girl into a star. When Nell arrived in New York City in the late 1960s, the world suddenly felt enormous. She was just a small-town girl from Birmingham, standing in the middle of Harlem with nothing but her suitcase and that thunderstorm of a voice. Money was tight. Man, she worked every odd job she could find, waiting tables, cleaning houses, singing in smoky jazz clubs just to get by. But every night she performed, people remembered her. Her sound was unlike anything else on the scene, deep, raw, filled with gospel fire and pain that came straight from the soul. At first, it was all hustle. She sang backup for local artists, did a few off-Broadway gigs, and even joined a touring ensemble that performed spirituals across the East Coast. Those early years built her resilience. She learned the grind of show business the hard way, late nights, little pay, big dreams. Yet, even when the rent was overdue, she never stopped believing that her break would come. That break finally arrived in the mid-1970s when Nell landed a role in the Broadway musical Don't Bother Me, I Can't Cope. It was a small part, but it put her name on the map. Critics began to notice her stage presence, that radiant energy that made the audience lock in on her every move. One director described her as a voice that could shake the rafters and a spirit that could melt hearts. Endo. Then came Ain't Misbehavin', the show that would change everything. The production, based on the music of Fats Waller, needed performers who could sing, dance, act, and command a stage all at once. And man, Nell delivered. When she stepped out on that stage, it wasn't just performance, it was testimony. Her renditions of Mean to Me and Honeysuckle Rose had people leaping to their feet night after night. She didn't just play the part, she was the part. The show became a massive hit, earning rave reviews on Broadway and beyond. Audiences couldn't get enough of her. She brought soul, humor, and a rawness that felt authentic in every line. By 1978, Nell Carter won the Tony Award for Best Featured Actress in a Musical. That moment, standing on stage holding her Tony, was the culmination of years of struggle, sacrifice, and faith. From Birmingham to Broadway, she had made it. But Nell wasn't done yet. The Tony opened doors that had once been shut. Television producers started calling. Hollywood was finally paying attention. What came next would take Nell from the lights of Broadway to living rooms across America. After her Tony win, Nell Carter became one of the most talked-about talents in New York. Her success in Ain't Misbehavin' led to a television adaptation in 1982, which earned her an Emmy Award. Overnight, she went from Broadway darling to national treasure. But man, that transition wasn't easy. The entertainment industry was still reluctant to fully embrace black women in leading roles. Nell had to fight twice as hard for every opportunity, and she did it with style, humor, and pure force of will. In the late 1970s, she made guest appearances on shows like The Misadventures of Sheriff Lobo and The Joey Bishop Show, bringing that unmistakable energy that only she had. But the turning point came when NBC executives noticed her comedic timing and commanding presence. They saw something in Nell that America hadn't seen before, a powerhouse performer who could make you laugh one second and cry the next. In 1981, they gave her the role that would define her television career. Gimme a Break. The series centered on Nell Harper, a strong-willed woman who promised her dying friend she'd look after her 3 daughters, a premise that hit close to home for Nell, given her own history of caretaking and loss. It wasn't just a sitcom, it was part comedy, part heart, and Nell carried it with warmth and charisma that turned her into a household name. The show was a hit right from the start. Audiences fell in love with her no-nonsense attitude, quick wit, and the way she balanced humor with compassion. Critics praised her chemistry with co-star Dolph Sweet, who played the widowed police chief. The show ran for 6 seasons, earning multiple Emmy nominations and cementing Nell as one of the first black women to headline a successful network sitcom. Behind the scenes, though, Nell was still grounded. She treated the cast and crew like family, often cooking Southern meals for them on set. When younger actors like Joey Lawrence joined the show, she became a mentor, guiding them with the same toughness and tenderness that made her character so beloved. But even with all that success, Nell knew she wasn't being celebrated the way she deserved. Hollywood still put her in a box, the funny black woman, the caretaker, the sidekick. She wanted to be known not just for her laugh, but for her range. That hunger to prove herself would push her to take on even more challenging roles in the years to come. She had conquered Broadway. She had conquered television. But at the height of her fame, the world was about to see that behind every laugh, there was a storm waiting to break. When Gimme a Break premiered in October 1981, nobody expected it to hit the way it did. But man, Nell Carter had something you couldn't teach. That natural timing, that soul, that spark that jumped right off the screen. From the very first episode, audiences knew she was special. She wasn't just playing Nell Harper, she was Nell Harper. The way she scolded, hugged, sang, and rolled her eyes all felt real. She wasn't pretending to care for that family. She carried them, just like she carried everyone in her real life. The show became a surprise hit for NBC, pulling in millions of viewers every week. Families across America tuned in not just for laughs, but for warmth, and Nell gave them both. She represented something rarely seen on television at the time, a strong, independent black woman who was loving, wise, and unapologetically herself. She broke stereotypes without preaching about it. She just was. Her performance was so magnetic that even critics who were slow to praise sitcoms couldn't ignore her anymore. The Los Angeles Times called her a comedic powerhouse with the heart of a blues singer. And man, they were right. One minute she'd be belting out a gospel tune that made the hair on your arms stand up, and the next she'd be cracking a joke that had you falling out of your chair. Nell's chemistry with Dolph Sweet, who played Chief Kaniski, was the soul of the show. Their back and forth, her sass against his gruffness, created a rhythm that audiences adored. And when Dolph passed away in 1985, Nell carried the series on her shoulders, even dedicating episodes to his memory. That resilience was classic. Nell, keep the laughter alive even when your heart is breaking. By the mid-1980, Gimme a Break had turned Nell into a television icon. She performed at award shows, hosted specials, and became a familiar face in American living rooms. Yet despite her growing fame, she still felt underrated, underappreciated for the depth of her craft. Hollywood loved her charm but often overlooked her dramatic range. Still, Nell didn't slow down. She used her newfound platform to speak out about representation and the challenges faced by black women in entertainment. She didn't just want to open doors for herself, she wanted to kick them open for everyone coming behind her. For a moment, it seemed like Nell Carter had finally found balance, fame, respect, and a chance to show the world what she was made of. But behind the laughter, the spotlight was starting to take its toll. The pressures of success, personal struggles, and the pain she had carried for years were all quietly building. As the 1,980 rolled on, Nell Carter was everywhere. She was appearing on talk shows, performing at award ceremonies, and even hosting specials where she showed off that powerhouse voice. People who only knew her as the funny lady from Gimme a Break were shocked when they heard her sing live. That gospel-trained, soul-drenched sound could stop a room cold. Man, when Nell opened her mouth, you felt it in your bones. But fame, as always, came with a heavy price. Working on a weekly sitcom was demanding. The shooting schedule was brutal, and Nell carried much of the emotional weight on set. She wasn't just performing, she was mothering, mentoring, and managing her own pain. The death of her co-star and friend Dolph Sweet hit her harder than most realized. Yet she kept smiling for the cameras, telling jokes between takes, keeping morale alive. That's who she was, a fighter with a tender heart. After Gimme a Break ended in 1987, Nell continued to appear in television roles that showcased her versatility. She guest starred on shows like 227, Amen, and Ally McBeal, proving she could jump between comedy and drama with ease. Later, in the 1990s, she joined the cast of Hangin' with Mr. Cooper, introducing her to a new generation of viewers. Her presence brought instant credibility, that warmth and humor that made everything around her shine brighter. Yet Hollywood, in all its glitz, still didn't know what to do with someone like Nell. She wasn't a cookie-cutter starlet. She wasn't the glamorous type that magazines splashed across their covers. She was real, grounded, and unapologetically herself, and sometimes that authenticity scared the industry. Directors loved her, audiences adored her, but executives didn't always see the box office value of a full-figured black woman leading a film or series. That lack of recognition hurt her deeply. Still, she never lost her connection to her roots. Nell returned to the stage whenever she could, performing in musicals and cabarets that reminded her why she fell in love with performing in the first place. Whether she was singing gospel in a small church or belting out show tunes in front of thousands, she gave the same 100% every single time. Nell Carter had become a symbol of perseverance. She had climbed from the streets of Birmingham to Broadway, from Broadway to network television, a trailblazer who carried entire generations of black performers on her shoulders. But beneath all the laughter and applause, her heart was tired. The pressures of fame, the weight of expectations, and the ghosts of her past were beginning to surface again. The woman who had spent her whole life lifting others up was quietly sinking under her own pain. And soon, the world would see the side of Nell that she tried so hard to hide, the one behind the smile. Fame can be a blessing and a curse, and for Nell Carter, it was both. Behind the laughter that filled living rooms across America, she was fighting silent battles that few people ever saw. The woman who made millions smile was, deep down, carrying an unbearable amount of pain. Nell had long struggled with her mental health. Years of trauma, losing her father, losing her brother, and facing racism and rejection had left scars that no amount of applause could heal. During her time on Gimme a Break, she quietly battled depression. She was open about her struggles with addiction, admitting later in interviews that she had turned to cocaine in the late 1970s as a way to cope with pressure and loneliness. "It made me feel like I could handle everything," she once said, "until I couldn't." Ezer. At the height of her fame, Nell entered rehab to reclaim control of her life. It wasn't easy. She had to do it under the glare of the media, with fans and tabloids speculating about her every move. But Nell faced it head-on. She didn't hide from her mistakes. She tried to learn from them. That honesty, that vulnerability, made people love her even more. She wasn't pretending to be perfect, she was human. Still, the hits kept coming. In 1982, Nell experienced one of the most devastating losses of her life. She suffered a miscarriage. For a woman who had always wanted to be a mother, that pain cut deep. She later adopted 3 children, pouring all of her love and care into them. Yet even motherhood, as fulfilling as it was, couldn't always silence the ache inside her. She was raising her kids, working nonstop, and trying to maintain the image of the cheerful star everyone adored, all while dealing with the private storms that wouldn't let up. As if emotional struggles weren't enough, Nell also faced constant pressure about her appearance. The entertainment industry, especially in the 1980s, was brutally unforgiving. Executives and producers often made comments about her weight, implying that she would be more marketable if she lost pounds. "Imagine hearing that when you've already given everything you have." Nell once said, "I've been every size, and I've still got the same voice." It was her way of reminding the world that talent had no dress size. But the relentless grind of Hollywood, mixed with personal demons, began to take a toll on her body. Health issues started creeping in: diabetes, high blood pressure, fatigue. She'd push through pain just to perform, smiling for the cameras when all she really needed was rest. She had always been the caretaker, the one who looked after everyone else. But who was looking after her? That's the heartbreaking part of Nell Carter's story. The world saw a woman full of life and laughter, but behind the spotlight was someone trying desperately to hold herself together. By the 1990s, Nell Carter was still fighting not for fame this time, but for peace. She had kicked her drug habit, regained control of her career, and focused on being the best mother she could be. But the battle to rebuild herself was far from over. Years of pressure, exhaustion, and heartbreak had left invisible bruises that even she couldn't laugh through anymore. She tried to make a comeback in music, returning to her gospel and jazz roots. She toured small venues, singing songs that told her story better than any interview could. Those performances were raw, soulful, and deeply personal. The audiences that came to see her weren't just fans, they were witnesses to a survivor. When she sang, you could hear both the pain and the hope in every note. In 1997, she took a brave step and appeared on Broadway again in Annie as Miss Hannigan. Critics praised her performance, calling it sharp, funny, and full of attitude. But behind the curtain, Nell was dealing with recurring health problems. Diabetes had become a serious issue, and she suffered from fatigue that made performing harder and harder. Still, she refused to quit. She told friends, "I'll rest when I can't sing anymore." Sadly, That day would come sooner than anyone expected. In 2002, Nell collapsed on stage during a theater rehearsal. She was rushed to the hospital and later revealed she had been struggling with diabetes, complications, and exhaustion. Doctors advised her to slow down, but Nell didn't know how to do that. Her whole life had been about pushing forward through pain, through loss, through disappointment. Performing was not just her job, it was her way of breathing. Then, on the 23rd of January, 2003, tragedy struck. Nell Carter was found unresponsive in her Beverly Hills home by one of her adopted sons. She had passed away at just 54 years old. The cause was ruled as heart disease, complicated by diabetes. The news hit fans like a thunderbolt. People who had grown up watching her couldn't believe it. One minute she was that smiling, vibrant woman on their TV screens, and the next she was gone. Tributes poured in from all over. Co-stars, producers, and fans filled the airwaves and the internet with love. Joey Lawrence, who played Joey on Gimme a Break, said, "She was like a second mom to me." Others described her as generous, hilarious, and full of life. But what hurt the most was how little the mainstream media talked about her compared to other stars. Once again, Nell Carter was being overlooked even in death. That's what made her story so bittersweet. She gave her heart to the world, but the world didn't always give that same love back. Yet even in her final days, she was still giving, still singing, still loving, still trying to lift others up. In the years after Nell Carter's passing, her voice, her laughter, and her spirit refused to fade away. She left behind a body of work that continues to move people from Broadway to television reruns that still air today. When you watch Gimme a Break, now, it's more than just a sitcom. It's a time capsule of her brilliance, her humor, and her heart. Every episode is a reminder of how she could command the screen without ever losing her warmth. What made Nell so special was that she never fit neatly into a single box. She was a singer, an actress, a comedian, and a storyteller. She could make you laugh until your sides hurt, and then turn around and break your heart with a single song. That kind of range is rare, man. Real rare. And that's why people still talk about her decades later. You can see her influence everywhere. Amber Riley from Glee, Jill Scott, Jennifer Hudson, Octavia Spencer, and Davine Joy Randolph have all walked through doors that Nell helped open. Each of them carries a little bit of her, the unapologetic joy, the emotional honesty, the power to make an audience feel something real. When people talk about Black women in comedy and television paving the way, Nell's name should always be in that conversation. What's crazy is that younger audiences are still discovering her today through streaming and YouTube clips. They see those old performances, the sass, the sparkle, the soul, and can't believe someone like her was doing all that in the early 1980s. In an era when representation was scarce, Nell Carter stood tall and told the world, "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." Her Tony and Emmy wins proved her talent was undeniable, but her real legacy lives in how she made people feel. Ask any fan, they'll tell you Nell wasn't just acting. She was giving a piece of herself every time she performed. She made people laugh on bad days and gave hope to those who felt unseen. And let's not forget her music. That gospel foundation stayed with her all her life, giving her performances a depth that you just couldn't fake. Whether she was singing Broadway classics or spiritual hymns, she sang with the conviction of someone who had lived every word. Nell Carter didn't just entertain, she inspired. She reminded people that greatness doesn't always come wrapped in perfection, and that real beauty lies in authenticity.